2 years. Well, I hear heckling from the Conservatives, but I don't think... I'm also mindful there's a school class right behind the Conservative benches today, and those young people... Yeah.
Let's hear the Cabinet Secretary.
And those young people, of course, had their education disrupted for a period of 2 years. And, of course, we have seen an increase in relation to anxiety and a number of other reasons why young people might not be able to engage in their school education. Actually, I think it is worthwhile pointing out to a number of actions that have been taken, but I have been engaging with the member's colleague, Liam Kerr, on this matter in relation to those children that are persistently absent from school. The challenge needs sustained effort, not just from government, but from local authorities who in Scotland have the statutory responsibility for ensuring that our young people do attend school. But it is why, back last year, I commissioned Education Scotland's report published in November, which is focused on improving attendance. As part of our response to that, I've also tasked, as I intimated in my initial response, the Interim Chief Inspector to work directly with Directors of Education. That includes ensuring persistent absence is addressed in every school inspection. We have asked for additional data. Now, the member speaks to missing children. That's not how it's characterised in Scotland. Our measures are quite different, but we've added in a new data measurement that looks specifically at persistent absence. And of course,
Cabinet Secretary, I must ask you to conclude at that point. And question number 7, I call Rachel Hamilton.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it plans to strengthen its Fair Work First guidance to support and promote the good practice example referenced in the guidance of providing a private, healthy and safe environment for breastfeeding mothers to express and store milk.
Minister Tom Arthur.
Our Fair Work First guidance currently provides good practice examples for supporting women at work, including providing safe spaces for breastfeeding mothers. Parent Club, our national online parenting platform, provides practical advice and information on rights for breastfeeding mothers on returning to work. I am happy to consider how best to provide advice to employers on supporting breastfeeding mothers in the workplace and strengthen action required to address labour market inequalities faced by women and other groups in our society.
Rachel Hamilton.
I thank the Minister for that answer. I want to share the experience briefly of one of my constituents who recently returned to work. She said that she was disappointed to find that the lactation room was being shared with blood donation and first aid. She added that there were overfilled yellow hazard bins, blood splatters on the pillows, and the fridge, which she was supposed to store her breast milk in, was being used for a surface as blood collection. She felt that this was unhygienic and a possible health and safety issue. When she raised it with her employer, she was told that this was the room or nothing. Thankfully, she's been reallocated an office space. But does the Minister accept that whilst there is existing guidance, some women are still not provided with a private, healthy and safe environment to express milk at work? Would he be prepared to meet with me to discuss how the 2005 Act could be strengthened?
Minister.
I recognise the concerning set of circumstances that the member has narrated to Parliament. Of course, we are in the period right now of refreshing our Fair Work guidance. I'm happy to take on board the issues that the member raises, and of course I am more than happy to meet with the member to discuss the matters in more detail.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. At question number 1, I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to concentrate my first question today on the announcement this morning that the Grangemouth refinery will shut after 100 years of operation. The decision to close Scotland's only refinery will see 400 jobs lost directly at Grangemouth. This is a devastating blow to the workforce, the Falkirk area and the entire Scottish economy. Supporting the employees at this difficult time must be the priority of both of Scotland's governments. A PwC report published this morning said that the economic contribution of the refinery, supply chain and employee spending was £403.6 million in 2023, and it's estimated to support 2,800 jobs across Scotland. So can I ask the First Minister to outline his government's response to this announcement and say what support the Scottish Government will put in place to support the employees at this difficult time?
First Minister.
President Officer, this is a profoundly serious issue, and my first thoughts at the outset of the handling of this issue is with the workforce who will face great uncertainty as a consequence of the announcement that has been made this morning by Ineos. There has been extensive engagement and dialogue between the Scottish Government and the United Kingdom Government with Ineos about this issue, and both governments have made the case for refining to be continued for as long as it was possible, and certainly not for the announcement to be made today that refining will be ending in Q2 of 2025, because Mr Ross is correct, that will raise significant economic implications for Scotland. It was for this reason that I raised this issue in my first conversation with the Prime Minister on the 5th of July after the election, and there has been good and sustained engagement with the UK Government on this question. This morning, both governments have announced that the approval of the Falkirk and Grangemouth growth deal, which will see the investment of £100 million of investment in the locality, which will provide assistance for the locality to recover from this significant economic shock. There will secondly be immediate career support for workers made available in tailored support to support employees to find employment should they face those issues. And thirdly, there will be investment in the site's long-term future. The Scottish Government and the United Kingdom Government have both jointly funded the Project Willow study, which has identified a short list of credible options to begin the building of a new long-term industry at the refinery site, including low-carbon hydrogen, clean e-fuels and sustainable aviation fuels. And we will put in all effort that we can to support the workforce at this very, very difficult and worrying time. There will be intense dialogue with the trade unions, with the company, with Falkirk Council on these questions, and I give Parliament the assurance that we will update members as the events take their course. But the Government's commitment and our commitment to work collaboratively with the United Kingdom Government is absolute to support the workers of Grangemouth in their time of need.
Douglas Ross.
I think it's absolutely right that this Parliament is united in supporting those workers at this difficult time, and Scottish Conservative members for Central Scotland and indeed our entire group will work with both governments to assist in any way we can. Can I move to another issue that has been dominating many of the conversations we've all been having with constituents in the last few weeks? The winter fuel payment, shamelessly cut by the Labour government at Westminster, was devolved here to the Scottish Government. Here in Scotland, the decision not to pay this money to pensioners is one for the SNP Scottish Government. In announcing their decision to scrap the winter fuel payment, the SNP must have known the impact this is going to have on 900,000 pensioners here in Scotland. Labour said this policy would kill thousands of pensioners across the United Kingdom. And due to our colder climate, a disproportionate number of those are likely to be in Scotland. So does the First Minister accept that his government's decision will lead to unnecessary deaths here in Scotland? And if so, how many?
Minister.
Sir, I deeply regret the fact that the Scottish Government finds itself in the position that we find ourselves in. We fully expected the devolution of the winter fuel payment issue to the Scottish Government, and we're planning to pay that support to pensioners in Scotland on a universal basis. That was our plan. That's what we were working on. And with 90 minutes' notice, we were abruptly told that our budget would be cut by £160 million because of the decision of the United Kingdom Government. So this is not of our making or planning, and it certainly is not of our choice. But Mr Ross also knows that the Scottish Government, once we have established a budget for the year, we cannot increase the size of that budget unless there are positive consequential funding decisions from the United Kingdom Government. In this case, we have had a negative consequential financial decision which cuts our budget by £160 million. So I very much regret the fact that we will not be able to make these payments on a universal basis, but we have suffered a budget cut from the United Kingdom Government, and the Scottish Government is responding to that accordingly.
Douglas Ross.
It was a straightforward question, so I'll ask it again. Does John Swinney believe...
Let's hear Mr Ross, thank you.
Does John Swinney believe, as a result of the decision taken by SNP ministers here in Scotland, there will be unnecessary deaths, and if so, how many? He must know. But John Swinney also said, presiding officer, it was always the plan to continue to deliver this payment universally. That is not true. The Scottish Government's response to the consultation on the pension age winter heating payment, published in May, long before the Labour Government's announcement, said this: "We will continue to review the eligibility and scope of the pension age winter fuel heating payment moving forward." The SNP were considering cutting that payment back in May.
Let us hear Mr Ross.
It's in black and white in their own document. Now, politics is about choices, and John Swinney's government has chosen to pass on Labour cuts which could see 900,000 Scottish pensioners losing out. The SNP could have mitigated against those cuts. They have a budget of over £50 billion, and just this week we have seen...
Can we have a question, Mr
Just
Ross?
this week we have seen the bloated Scottish Government civil service reach a record high. So can I ask John Swinney, why are public sector pen pushers more important to him than stopping pensioners freezing in their homes?
First Minister.
In his last weeks in office as Conservative leader, Douglas Ross really is plumbing the depths in the questions that he puts to Parliament today. His interpretation of the document, I think, is a vindication of that comment. Douglas Ross knows full well the way in which the finances of the Scottish Government operate. If we suffer a cut in our budget of £160 million, courtesy of the Labour Government, we have got to respond to that, and we have got to act accordingly. Now, I need no lessons from Douglas Ross about mitigating decisions of the United Kingdom Government, because this government is mitigating a series of decisions taken by Douglas Ross and his colleagues on an ongoing basis about the bedroom tax and other measures where we picked up the pieces because of the odious decisions taken by the Conservative Government in London. So I will take no lessons from Douglas Ross on that point. But then Douglas Ross says to me there are choices. Of course there are choices. If we followed the Conservatives on what they have said about tax and spending, I wouldn't be cutting the budget by £160 million. I'd be cutting it by £2 billion, because that's the reality of the Conservative position that they put to Parliament. So I'm going to take no lessons today from Douglas Ross as he desperately clutches for straws in his last weeks in office.
Douglas Ross.
First Minister, standing up for Scotland's pensioners is not clutching at straws. And isn't it telling that John Swinney has now twice been asked how many people in Scotland could die as a result of his policy, and he refuses to answer? It is in black and white that the SNP were considering this in May of this year. They repeatedly call for more powers, but when they're given the chance to act, they run in the opposite direction and blame Westminster. Surely the point of devolution is to make different choices, especially when lives are at risk.
I just find it very difficult to hear, as I'm sure others are too. Let's conduct ourselves in a courteous and respectful manner. Let's hear one another. Mr Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was saying surely the point of devolution is to make different choices, especially when lives are at risk. You can't oppose Labour cuts at Westminster and simply pass them on at Holyrood, all while pretending they are nothing you can do about it. Scotland is colder than the rest of the UK. Winter fuel payments must be an even greater priority here. The £160 million cost of these payments is just a fraction, 0.3% of the Scottish Government's £50 billion budget. Surely the SNP Government can find the money if it's important to them. So why is keeping pensioners warm this winter not a priority for John Swinney?
First Minister.
Douglas Ross raised the question, Presiding Officer, about the exercise of new powers. So when this government acquired new powers, we took decisions to, for example, ask people in higher earners to contribute more in taxation in Scotland. I think that was the right decision to make, because what that's enabled us to do is to fund the expansion of early learning and childcare so that families across the country have got the best childcare offering in the whole of the United Kingdom. I'm very proud that our government has put that in place. It's enabled us to spend over £400 million on ensuring that we deliver the Scottish Child Payment, which is contributing to, amongst other measures, keeping 100,000 children out of poverty. Now, there's the exercise of choices that we have made as a government, and I'm very proud of them. But the difficulty we face on the issue about winter fuel payments is that within this
hear the First Minister.
Within this financial year, our budget is being cut. At the same time as we are affording pay increases for public sector workers, nurses.
First Minister, I mean, quite frankly, members know that they are not conducting themselves in a courteous and respectful manner. Where there have been previous opportunities to put questions, I would ask members to focus and listen. First Minister.
So, at the same time as we've got a budget cut of £160 million about winter fuel payments, we're affording over £800 million of additional costs to meet the costs of pay bills so that teachers and nurses and other members of the public services who are delivering vital services in our country. Why are you still shouting at me, Mr Hoy? You've got to listen to the presiding officer. You've got to listen to the presiding officer and stop behaving badly.
First Minister. I can assure the First Minister that I am wholly prepared to chair this meeting. I will not have any members shouting at one another. So let's start to conduct ourselves in an appropriate manner for this Parliament. First Minister.
So Presiding Officer, within the financial year that we face, where we have an acute cut to our budget of the winter fuel payments, this government has been left with no choice. But what I will say to Douglas Ross is that I will take absolutely no lesson from Douglas Ross, who supported every act of financial vandalism of the last Conservative government, every act of austerity which is leading to suffering amongst pensioners and families in our country, and the Conservatives have got no lessons to teach us.
Question number 2, Jackie Baillie.
Presiding Officer, this morning Petro Ineos have confirmed their decision to decommission the refinery at Grangemouth. For the workforce, their families, as well as the wider community, I know this will be a time of great anxiety. Since the refinery closure was first proposed, Labour have called for both of Scotland's governments to get round the table to find solutions. And that's why Keir Starmer raised the issue with the First Minister during his first visit to Scotland after the election. And that's why the clear message this morning is that the UK Labour government is ready to support the workforce and secure a viable long-term future for the site. Like me, I am sure the First Minister welcomes this assurance. Can I ask, will he join with me in committing to continue the work with the UK Government in the interests of the Grangemouth community and Scotland's energy security?
First Minister.
I'm very happy to give that confirmation to Parliament today. That's been the spirit in which the Scottish Government has operated since the issues were raised by Petro Ineos some months ago. Certainly since the change of government in July, we've had sustained engagement. There was actually sustained engagement before that, but it's carried on under the new government. And as I explained in my first answer to Mr Ross, there is a series of measures that the United Kingdom Government and the Scottish Government have announced this morning, which are designed to address the immediate issues. But I do give Jackie Baillie the assurance that the Scottish Government will concentrate and focus on meeting the needs of the workforce at what I acknowledge will be an extremely worrying time for them.
Jackie Baillie.
I very much welcome that commitment from the First Minister. The plan announced today delivers a £100 million fund to drive growth in Grangemouth and support the workforce, investment in new energy projects and a new technology centre to support the use of low-carbon technologies, career and skills support for the existing workforce and an employment hub to support emerging energy sectors and exploring new potential opportunities for Labour's National Wealth Fund in clean technologies like hydrogen and clean aviation fuel. All of this has been pulled together in the first 9 weeks of a UK Labour government, and it gives the hope of a strong industrial energy future at Grangemouth. I welcome the joint investment by both governments. Does the First Minister agree that this shows how the people of Scotland benefit from the Labour government's approach to cooperation rather than conflict?
Minister.
I think on a matter of fact, actually, and I have to be fair on this question, there was a lot of dialogue with the previous Conservative government on this issue. But so I think to be absolutely fair, this issue has been taken seriously by the United Kingdom government of whatever colour, and it's certainly been taken deadly seriously by the Scottish government. The Project Willow study, which is a really important part of research about viable alternatives for development of the site, predates the existing government. So but I'm glad that that's been supported as a consequence of the announcements today. I agree very much about the basis of cooperation. It's no secret that the Scottish Government would like the United Kingdom Government to move faster on the authorising of the Acorn carbon capture and storage project. It has been a subject of deep concern to me that promises that were made to me directly by ministers in the last United Kingdom Government have not been fulfilled about the authorisation of that scheme. And I feel deeply let down by the fact that that has not happened. And promises were given and they have not been fulfilled. So it's a point I have made to the Prime Minister that an early authorisation of the Acorn carbon capture and storage project would be a significant boost to the efforts to find new opportunities in the Grangemouth site, and I do hope the United Kingdom Government is listening carefully to the words I'm saying to Parliament today.
Jackie Bailey.
I think you'll find the government has not just been listening carefully, but has been acting in the interests of the people of Scotland. And of course, a new National Wealth Fund is something that didn't exist before the Labour government came to power, and that can make change happen. And a UK Labour government working with the Scottish Government is part of the promise we made to Scots at the general election. Labour made a commitment that we would not leave communities behind. And that's why we've got on with passing the legislation to set up GB Energy, awarded a record-breaking number of clean energy contracts, announcing this £100 million support package for Grangemouth alongside the Scottish Government, protecting Scotland's industrial base, securing the well-paid jobs of the future, and delivering the transition to net zero. This new consensus doesn't appear to have lasted long on the SNP-backed benches. But there is more we could and should be doing here in Scotland. It's taken 3 years for the SNP to publish a green industrial strategy. So whilst I welcome the enthusiasm with which the First Minister has engaged with the UK Labour government in the last few weeks, does he agree that to deliver new investment, good jobs and energy security for Scotland, we need to step up action here as well?
First Minister.
There's plenty of action on green energy and green opportunities in Scotland. Just one of my first engagements as First Minister was to announce the investment at the Ardres Airport near Inverness, followed by the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero announcing the investment at Sumitomo in Nig, which is another formidable investment in the renewable sector. And just on Monday, I had the pleasure of being in Buckie for to inaugurate the operations and maintenance facility of Ocean Wind, who are leading the development of the Murray East and Murray West offshore renewables plant, wind farm. Now, that's all happening on the watch of the Scottish Government, and I'm delighted that that's happening. Now, Jackie Bailey is right. We've got to intensify the pace, which is why the Green Industrial Strategy has been published. We'd also be helped if we perhaps had access to, or actually had control over, the £150 million of the war chest that apparently the Secretary of State for Scotland has got at his disposal. Because if the funding arrangements were working properly, we would have here for us to invest in the Scottish economy to accelerate developments and perhaps to put even more than we've already put into the carbon capture and storage project that I was talking about a moment ago. So I'm all for working together. But let's make sure we've got the resources here by the end to austerity, which allows us to invest in the economy. And while we're on the subject of promises and what's been delivered by the Labour government promised that it would reduce people's fuel bills by £300, and they are going to go up by £149 on average. That is not the change that people voted for in Scotland.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvie.
I certainly agree with the First Minister and others that our thoughts today must be with the workforce and the community affected by the announcement regarding Grangemouth. But the truth is that the government has been well aware for years that Grangemouth urgently needed a just transition plan. And yesterday's so-called Green Industrial Strategy contained nothing new to achieve a fair transition away from polluting industries. So the workforce and the community have been failed by the private owners, but they've been failed by both governments too. Why has the Scottish Government produced a green industrial strategy that looks like it was written by oil and gas lobbyists and which contained no transition plan for Grangemouth?
First Minister.
I welcome the comments that Mr Harvie's put on the record about the workforce at Grangemouth. I don't think it's a laughing matter, to be honest, to the Conservatives about the hardship that's faced by the employees at Grangemouth. So I welcome the comments that Mr Harvie's put on the record about the workforce, because I think it is important that Parliament acts with solidarity when members of the public face difficulties. But in relation to the Green Industrial Strategy, amongst the 5 opportunity areas in the Green Industrial Strategy, the first one of them is about investment in the wind industry, which is a formidable contributor towards our Green Industrial Strategy. I know that Mr Harvie takes a different view to the government on carbon capture and storage, but it's an important element of our Green Industrial Strategy, as are the development of financial products that will enable investment in the self-same renewable energy industries that I've talked about, or the development of hydrogen possibilities, which have got enormous significance with the export potential that can arise out of the investment we're making in offshore wind. So I hope some of that detail gives Mr Harvie confidence that the Green Industrial Strategy is meeting the needs of both the workforce at Grangemouth, but also applies across the Scottish economy in providing new opportunities for transition.
Patrick Harvie.
Look, the news about Grangemouth this week makes it all the more important that the government is truly honest about its climate action, but they didn't even want to tell Parliament about their legally required plan to make up for their missed targets. They slipped it out on Friday with no debate, no statement to Parliament, not even a press release on that legally required report. And no wonder they're embarrassed by it. It's supposed to show what new climate action they're going to take to make up for falling further behind on climate. But it contains no new policy whatsoever. And this after they spent the last few weeks abandoning policies that the Greens achieved in government. They've raided the Nature Restoration Fund and the ScotWind money, and they're planning a big increase in rail fares, which the Greens had cut. So how can they publish this report with literally no new policy in it and still expect to be taken seriously while they're rushing through a new climate bill that kicks this ever more urgent issue into ever longer grass?
First Minister.
I think it's important that we look at all of the detail that's relevant in this area. So, for example, in the programme for government that I announced last Wednesday, we set out our investment programme for a just transition fund in the North East and in Murray. We set out our plans to significantly enhance the capacity of Scotland to generate renewable energy. And of course, we've made formidable progress on the decarbonisation of electricity since this government came to power and achieved significant improvements in that process. The programme for government included material about the expansion or the restoration of 10,000 hectares of degraded peatland and the creation of 10,000 hectares of woodlands. And there's a variety of other measures in the programme for government that support our work on climate change. And I want to be crystal clear to to Mr Harvey, that the Government is absolutely committed to the journey we've got to take on climate. That's underpinned our activities since we came to office in 2007, and it will underpin our activities in the years to come. This transition has got to be made. It has to be made fairly for all communities involved, and that's the approach the Scottish Government will take.
Thank you. I call Bob Doris, question number 4.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government's plans to improve the planning and consenting regime for renewable energy generation can support the journey to net zero.
Minister.
Presiding Officer, robust and timely planning and consenting of renewable energy projects and infrastructure are key to growing our economy and delivering on our net zero commitments. The steps that we take in relation to providing clarity and confidence to support renewables development and investment are critical to enable Scotland's transition to net zero. That's why I set out in the programme for Government last week a set of actions to deliver improvements that we need to see in the current regime. These include establishing Scotland's first ever planning hub to build capacity and skills in planning teams with an initial focus on hydrogen applications, making consenting faster and more consistent for proposals over 50 megawatts, introducing new guidance for transmission developments and updating our marine planning framework.
Doris.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. The Green Industrial Strategy will be key in that context for Scotland's drive to net zero by 2045 and promoting a just transition. First Minister, can you advise how the actions set out in that strategy will help Scotland to secure both growth and investment, but it goes beyond renewable energy also. So what details can you give that's contained in that strategy about how it will support decarbonisation, for instance, of the built environment and construction sector, given it generates 40% of emissions?
First Minister. So Mr Doris makes a number of very important points in relation to the Green Industrial Strategy and the steps that we have to take. As I outlined in my answer to Mr Harvey, there are 5 key opportunity areas where we need to take further action on the transition in relation to investment, innovation and entrepreneurship in a number of sectors: wind, carbon capture and storage, professional financial services, hydrogen and clean industries. We already have formidable leadership in this area, but Mr Doris is right to raise the issue of the construction sector and the need for it to reduce its emissions. We are working in collaboration with the construction sector on decarbonisation through the Construction Leadership Forum and its codes which set out agreed actions on decarbonisation.
Keen to take as many members as possible for supplementaries, if we can keep these concise, and I call Tess White.
First Minister, the North East is experiencing a dramatic increase in new transmission infrastructure to serve offshore wind. Affected communities do deserve proper consultation, but that has been far from the case. For residents bearing the brunt of this new infrastructure, this feels like an unfair and an unjust transition. And as the Scottish Government looks to improve the planning and consenting regime for renewables, you describe it as making consenting faster, would the First Minister be willing to meet with the community representatives and campaigners to listen to their concerns and to ensure they are not being left behind?
First Minister.
I think it's very important that there is a good quality, high quality community engagement about all developments of any nature. That actually helps to make the consenting and planning process more efficient. If those who are taking forward developments engage in good dialogue and good engagement with individual communities. I'm very familiar with the issues that Tess White raises, and I'm sure ministers would be happy to meet campaigners. Of course, ministers have to be careful about the engagement they have on particular developments because of the need to observe the ministerial code in taking decisions on these questions.
Tom Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the fact that you're seeking to make consenting faster, because the First Minister is aware that delays have affected such things as Berwick Bank offshore wind. So in his role as First Minister, could he facilitate a meeting regarding the Eskdale Muir seismic array in Dumfries and Galloway, which is causing problems with regards to community wind power's development there?
First Minister. On individual applications, I think I will generally just take the view that I will not say anything in Parliament, because that keeps me on the right side of the ministerial code. I'm not sure the status of the application that Mr Whitfield raises with me, but I will take that away and consider whether it's appropriate for ministers to engage, because I don't know the stage of that application, and it would be careless for me to say otherwise.
Beatrice Wishart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Shetland's the windiest part of the country, so for obvious reasons it attracts both onshore and offshore wind developments. Islanders are aware of the contribution such projects make to reach net zero, but there is a view that onshore developments should not be built near existing properties and communities. Does the First Minister recognise the concerns about the proximity of wind turbines to homes and the impact of turbine noise and shadow flicker? And what can the Scottish Government do in terms of planning and consent to ensure a specified minimum distance between properties and future onshore wind developments?
First Minister.
I understand the significance of the issues that Beatrice Wishart puts to me, and my view would be that the issues that she raises should be properly and fully considered in any planning process. I am very happy to consider whether there are enhancements to the process that need to be undertaken to provide the reassurance that she seeks. I'm also very conscious from some of the dialogue I've had with representatives of the community in Shetland of some of the concerns that are raised about developments, and also the relationship between power generation in the Shetland Islands with the cost of energy for local residents, which I recognise is a very, very significant issue. So I'm very happy to have further dialogue with Beatrice Wishart on that question.
Question number 5, Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to recent reports regarding Police Scotland's policy on self-identification for individuals charged with or convicted of serious sexual assaults.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government is clear that violence against women and girls is abhorrent. Through our Equally Safe strategy, we are aiming to prevent and tackle such violence and abuse, and address the underlying attitudes and behaviours that perpetuate the violence that too many experience. It is only through fundamental societal change that women can be protected. The Chamber is well aware the Scottish Government does not determine or interfere with operational matters of Police Scotland, which is accountable to the Scottish Police Authority and not to ministers.
Rachel Hamilton.
First Minister for that answer. But in a letter to a Holyrood committee, Police Scotland said they would allow a serious sex offender to self-declare their gender. This opens the door to a grotesque situation where a male rapist can demand to be called a woman and further traumatise his victim. Echoing language of the SNP, Police Scotland said that, I quote, "This was consistent with their values and promotes a strong sense of belonging." This is an insult to the victims of rape and serious assault. The only strong sense this should inspire is disgust. Does the First Minister agree with me and women across Scotland that male rapists shouldn't get their own way? Or is he content to let another Isla Bryson situation happen?
First Minister.
Let me be absolutely crystal clear with Parliament. I have never in my life believed, or will ever believe, in the words of Rachel Hamilton, that a male rapist should get his way. I will not be associated with that language. And our law and our legal framework makes that abundantly clear. Now, in relation to the specific question about the guidance from Police Scotland, these are operational matters for Police Scotland. There would be outrage if I was to interfere in the actions and the decision-making of Police Scotland, and the law is clear that I cannot do that. But I'm sure that Police Scotland will have heard the exchanges in Parliament today and will consider the issues, if there are any issues that they wish to address.
Pauline McNeill.
Behind the recording of crime statistics are real victims, such as the women who had to sit through court proceedings last year and hear their rapist referred to as a woman. I don't really think the First Minister can ignore responsibility, because Police Scotland, as said by Rachel Hamilton, has said it's consistent with their values. But I think the government needs to be clear, is it consistent with their values? And if a message is to go from the First Minister today, does it not make a mockery of the government's violence against women strategy if violent male offenders can present as women and this could be accepted by the police? It's that critical.
First Minister.
The government's strategy in relation to the tackling of violence against women is absolutely crystal clear, that there is no place for violence against women in our society. Absolutely crystal clear. And the perpetrators of that violence must be confronted with their behaviour and must be held to account for their behaviour. That is the foundation of our legal system. Now, Polly McNeill is a very experienced commentator and parliamentarian on issues in relation to justice policy. She knows that I cannot interfere in the operational business of Police Scotland. Indeed, the law prevents me from doing so. But the issues have been aired here in Parliament today, and Police Scotland will have the opportunity to consider them.
Ash Regan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just to further underline this issue that we're discussing, stories have actually been running in the media this year discussing the increase in women committing sex crimes, when the reality, of course, is that these crimes are committed by men and they are being recorded as women's crimes. This is offensive to women, and it is grossly disrespectful to the victims of these crimes. So why are Scottish institutions still acting as if self-ID is the law when it is not? Institutions, however, do have legal obligations through the public sector equality duty to record sex accurately. Will the First Minister show leadership and address this horrible situation urgently?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, in the last published year of data for which data is available, 21-22, all convictions of rape or attempted rape were perpetrated by males. That's a statement of fact in relation to the most recent data that's available. I acknowledge the concerns that are being expressed in Parliament today, but I come back to the fundamental point that the recording of information on those committing crime is an operational matter for Police Scotland. They must be accountable for the decisions that they take, and it is not for the First Minister to interfere or specify in operational matters of Police Scotland.
Question number 6, Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking in response to reported rise in hospice care costs, including to ensure that employees in that sector have pay parity with NHS staff.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, independent hospices are highly valued and provide vital support to people and their families, as well as supporting other local health and social care services and teams delivering palliative care. I understand the pressures that hospices are currently facing, and the Scottish Government strives to support independent hospices where possible. There has been engagement and dialogue with the hospice sector, and the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health is meeting with Hospice UK and the Chair of the Scottish Hospice Leadership Group next week to discuss support options in more detail.
Carol Mockin.
Thank you. I thank the First Minister for that answer. Given hospice care is so valued, does the First Minister recognise urgent action is needed? The sector is under serious financial constraints and threats of closure. The Government must ensure the hospice workforce do not conclude that they are undervalued and leave the sector. Hospices simply cannot take that impact. So I ask, what action will the First Minister take today, right now, to reassure hospices and their workforce?
First Minister.
First of all, let me make it clear that I deeply value, and the Government deeply values, the work of the hospice sector, and I understand the financial challenges that are faced because of the wider pay deals that are being put in place or being consulted upon in relation to Agenda for Change, which creates difficulties for the hospice sector. There is ministerial engagement to address these questions, and that will be taken forward as a consequence of the discussions, the points that have been raised by Carol Mockin today.
Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In 2012, ministers put in place a chief executive letter for hospices across Scotland. That resulted in a very welcome situation which saw funding mutually agreed between the government and the hospices of around 50% calculation of agreed costs. That has collapsed since this letter has now not been taken, and the integration of health and social care, to around 25 to 28% of funding for hospices across Scotland. We need to see that change, First Minister. So can I ask what future models of funding are the Scottish Government going to look at to ensure that we have a built-in mechanism to take into account these pay costs and additional costs faced by the whole hospice sector?
First Minister.
Miles Briggs is correct that the arrangements that were previously in place were superseded by the introduction of the Public Bodies Joint Working Scotland Act 2014. Now, as a consequence of that Act, it became the responsibility of integrated joint boards to plan and resource adult palliative care services for their area, including hospice services based on local needs. That's the route by which these funding arrangements are resolved. We will continue to engage on these questions to determine what is the best approach to take to meet local needs, which of course will vary from different parts of the country. And the Ministers' meeting next week provides us the opportunity to reflect further on these questions.
Thank you. We move to general and constituency supplementaries, and I call Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My thoughts are first and foremost with the workers at the refinery in Grangemouth, for whom today's announcement will be a shock, if not a surprise. I'm also very mindful of the community for whom a just transition will feel too far away. As a constituency MSP, I will be doing everything in my power to sustain the life of the refinery and to ensure it and the important chemical cluster around it can be supported. Can I note that the £100 million quoted by the UK Government and Labour Party includes £80 million already agreed as part of the growth deal for the wider Falkirk district, that this included £50 million from the Scottish Government, and that these funds will not be solely focused on Grangemouth? However, I can today make the Chamber aware that I've been working with a third party who hopes to purchase the refinery in its entirety. The matter, of course, is commercially sensitive and confidential, but will the First Minister meet with me so that I can share what information I can with the permission of the potential buyer?
First Minister.
I'm very happy to do so. This is a very unnerving time for the workforce, and it's important that we all act in a way to make sure that there are good and positive opportunities for members of staff as they face such an anxious time. So I'm very happy to explore all possibilities, but I reiterate what I've put on the record already today, that the Scottish Government stands to support the workforce at Grangemouth to find the best way forward in these difficult circumstances.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware that the Commonwealth Games will no longer be taking place in Australia in 2026. However, Australia have offered this £100 million to underwrite if it's taken to Scotland. There's a further £50 million available from ticket sales and sponsorship. And there is a guarantee from the Commonwealth Council that the Commonwealth Games will be fully funded without the need for any Scottish Government intervention. Does the First Minister agree with me that the opportunity to bring the Games back to Scotland would be a fantastic event to promote Scotland to the world and to highlight sporting excellence to the Scottish public?
First Minister.
I think we all have very fond memories of the Commonwealth Games in 2014, which were a marvellous spectacle. But I think it is important that everybody who's considering and discussing this issue is aware that the proposal that has been brought forward would not be a replication of the Commonwealth Games of 2014. It would be a significantly reduced proposition compared to 2014. There is also some very practical issues about the length of preparatory time for the Games. We had 7 years to prepare in 2014. There is, of course, just a matter of just short of 2 years, actually, to prepare for any Games in 2026. And there are, of course, very significant financial issues, and Mr Whittle knows the pressures on the public purse at this time. So there are discussions underway with Commonwealth Games Scotland, to which the Government is engaging in good faith, and we will continue to do so.
Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The link between population growth and economic growth is of particular importance in the region that I represent. Keir Starmer has said he wants to work with the Scottish Government on common ground. So what indications has the First Minister had from the UK Government that it will devolve powers to this Parliament so that a rural visa pilot for sectors like social care and hospitality can be taken forward?
First Minister.
President, I've put that proposition to ministers in the United Kingdom Government. Indeed, I discussed it specifically with the Deputy Prime Minister when she visited me over the summer, because I think, as Emma Roddick will know from her constituency experience, there are acute shortages of workers in a number of sectors, and a rural visa pilot would help us to address some of the challenges that exist in Highland, which she fairly puts to me. So I would assure Emma Roddick that the Scottish Government is pressing the UK Government to act on these issues, because if they did, it would help to contribute towards stimulating further economic growth in Scotland, which I think we all would welcome.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the public gallery to do so before the debate begins. Can I remind members that would be grateful if they could remain in the chamber? That would be very helpful. Thank you.